Hi everybody, welcome to Talking Automotive with Mark and John. My name is Ky Sinclair and my co-host Mark Palavestra.
Hi John and welcome. Now today we have a very good frank fireside chat, although we're actually discussing things around Formula One cars. But today it's about how fast is this recovery going and where are we going to go in Q3 and Q4 this year?
And Mark, we're coming up to a big milestone. We're looking at our podcast number 10. I can't believe we've done so many and we've had some amazing people on the show.
Now we've been really enjoying this show. Hopefully you've been enjoying it as much as we have in putting it together. And we have a pipeline of some great guests to add further value to you, the industry, and have these conversations. Now, if anyone needs more information on any of the topics that we've covered, please contact either Ky Sinclair or myself, Mark Palavestra, on LinkedIn, and we will share with you further information and explore other opportunities with you. The other thing is, if you want to be a sponsor of these shows, please reach out to us. There is an opportunity for sponsorship to enable this show to continue.
Yeah, Mark, it also gives us a great opportunity to expand into other areas where we can share some of the audios onto other channels, make the podcast available onto different platforms. Be great.
Yes, exciting times, and there's still more to come. We've got a pipeline of people who are going to be participating in these podcasts going further. So we've got a lot of different support ancillary industry players that are keen to contribute to this. So look out for them. But today we're going to have a discussion around where we see things are at, summarise some of the podcasts that we've done in the past, see where our predictions have turned out, and where do we see this market going.
Let's jump into it, Mark.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, I think, Mark, it's a really good point. I think COVID's here to stay for some time, and we don't know how long that could be. It could be a year, it could be 18 months, it could be 2 years. So I think it's really important for the businesses to, as you say, they've had a chance now to have a good end of year, but they then need to try and structure the business in a way that they can survive until things come back to some sort of normality. But I think to lock down the business, it's more of a how do we do business in these conditions more than a complete locking down of the business. I think it's important to get your structures of the business right and so that you can survive, that your overheads are at the correct level.
So costs, one thing. Is that similar to going to hibernation? What are your thoughts on hibernation?
I think the problem with hibernation is if you hibernate and close down the business, you could just hibernate yourself out of business. So I think it's really important to get this, how are you going to do business right? And then you need to be really positive about it. You need to get your staff back on track and that this is how we're going to do business and we're going to make a success of this. So I think it's really important not to close everything down, but keep things going, but at a level that you can survive. You need to try and make assessment of what do you think the volume is going to be. Is it going to be at 75% of where it was? Taking into account that there are going to be shortages of stock, there's going to be shortages of new cars, there's going to be shortages of used cars. So taking that into account, because of the shortages, the margins may be a little bit better. You don't have to trade as aggressively in the market. And your market's going to be down because your small businesses have come in now, they've replaced their vehicles, and there's going to be a lot of people still unemployed in that until things start to kick back, until tourism starts to come back and the borders start to open up. So that could take some time. So it's important to get your cost structures, make sure that your assets are utilized properly, and there might be some hard decisions that need to be made now in the short term. But it's best to make that now, get everything structured right, and then look at it as a positive and work from there.
So, John, which segments do you see beneficial to target right now? Because the SME segment has done very well in the instant asset write-off. So we've seen utes, the medium pickups, flying out the door. We're seeing premium cars flying out the door. We're seeing vans flying out the door. So this is great news, really good news. So where do you see Q3 and what products do you see are the ones that are going to be present the most opportunity?
Mark, I think that we've seen it coming through already. I think some of that small car segment, because I think there might still be caution about jumping on public transport. I think your used car market could bring some positive returns. I think your small car segment might offer some opportunities. And then if the support in that continues, we've got the government support at the moment for building of houses and renovations and that. So that building sector is going to be reasonably strong. If they still continue with some of the infrastructure development and some of those projects kick off and go forward, that whole building sector could still be quite strong. So I think there's still quite a bit of opportunity there. It just depends on what happens. But I'm not so sure about the premium sector. I think that might slow down a bit as things go forward. I'm not sure. What's your view on that?
It's a very good question. So if you're a novated lease, are you going to rush out and buy a new novated lease? Why would you do that next month after, and into Q3? Job security is the critical piece here for those employees who take on those novated leases. I agree that the SUV or LCV market, I should say, the medium pickup and cab chassis will be strong, will continue to be strong. And this is where supply is going to be a critical piece. The factory's closing. It's going to be interesting to see what is available there. Used cars, we talked with Steve Short, where the supply is going to be actually quite constrained going into the back end of this year. There'll be a lot of trade-ins that would have occurred in May, June, and those cars will come back into the market, potentially be resold in July, August. So that's the best source of stock. The government will be still ticking over there. So if you'll recall from Brendan Green from Pickles, he talked about how the used car prices are still quite strong through the auctions because the demand is still strong. I can see used cars still being very strong towards in Q3 and even potentially into Q4. So used cars will be strong. LCVs will be still good because there's a business purpose requirement for it. The used cars and small car will be an opportunity because of those that want to get a transport solution and not use public transport. And we see a variation across the country too, with different states that are opening up and having different rules and requirements. So Victoria is still struggling with the second wave potentially. You've got other states where there are not, it's business as usual. So you've got that mobility occurring. In those states, there will be an increase in medium and large SUVs. If you think longer term, caravan sales are going through the roof. We're not going to have international travel for a while. So caravan sales are very, very strong, and motorhomes as well, because people are repurposing international travel budgets for a domestic holiday. So you'll need a medium SUV to tow that, or a large SUV to tow that caravan that you've just bought. So those vehicles will be in demand in the second half of this year. So look for some good opportunities with those. Obviously the LCVs, the bigger LCVs that have bigger towing capacities will be also in demand. So the lifestyle will come into play. It's not doom and gloom in every state, which is why there's upsides. So once we get more movement across state borders and heading into the nicer parts of the various states for recreation, those medium SUVs and large SUVs will be great news.
Mark, in terms of dealers, what are the things that you think dealers should be doing in terms of their business right now to get things back on track? Are there any particular things that they could be doing to improve the business?
Well, the good guys, the cream always rises to the top, so that the good operators are getting all the 1%ers right. As per Carl's podcast with us, Carl Winther, he talked about always having a message and always being in market from a messaging perspective, engaging with your local communities, doing all those 1%ers, providing that service solution, engaging with the customers. So we're seeing those dealers are doing exceptionally well. Right now, it's an easy trap to fall into, that the business is flying and how great is it. But what happens in the following months is the critical piece. So obviously local area marketing is a critical piece, engaging with your customers, having sales events, using someone like an Absolute Results, engaging with those customers to bring them in, because your used car stock will start to diminish again once you resell these existing cars that you've just traded in. So really getting your customers to turn their cars over. Interest rates are at fantastically low levels, so it's a really good time to take advantage of that. But the key there is to have that customer confidence and really engaging with that transportation solution. What do they really need? And this is, once again, we talked about those SUVs. They'll need them for their holidays. They're going to be driving around the state as opposed to flying interstate or flying internationally. So these are the freedom machines that they'll repurpose that money that has been sitting there for that overseas holiday. So good dealers will have their good service departments. They'll have very good used car focus, and also making sure they manage their inventories, looking at LCVs, those medium and large SUVs, and also those small and light cars. to target those customers that just want a solution, that don't want to use public transport anymore.
Mark, do you think there's any opportunities around the hygiene factors? I've seen a lot of dealers putting up screens around their service receptions and that. Do you think that should be extended into the showrooms around sales consultant desks? Are there any opportunities to create confidence with customers to come back into the showroom? Or have you heard of many dealers doing that at the moment?
That's a very good question. I think the service department hygiene is important because it's a must-do transaction. It's like going to the supermarket. You're going through the checkout. You want that screen. It protects the employee and also protects the customer and gives them confidence. I'm not so sure showrooms whether you need to have screens in your negotiating desk. This is where it gets back to the podcast we had with Ag. And if you look at that online journey and that online solution that you have with a customer, they're doing more of that research anyway. When they're coming in, they just want that validation that what they've researched is correct and that car actually matches what they think it's going to do for them. So if anything, having that more of a digital focus, more of a digital engagement is the critical piece here. I'm probably a little bit old school. It would be odd, I think, to have screens inside the showroom. There are enough barriers to a human interaction as it is, but having a screen, not so. But obviously you need to have your COVID policy in place with obviously your hand sanitizer and give people lots of confidence. There are also organisations that are providing the sterilisation of cars. So there are mobile services that actually go around to dealerships to provide that. So that's something definitely worth investigating, also giving your customers confidence that you're doing it.
So in terms of, a lot of dealers and that supply their financial figures to some of the big consulting firms, they review these and they have a good look at best practice. To me, I think that's a really good thing to be doing at the moment, because you need to be looking at how are you comparing, because the times are really tough at the moment, and how do you compare against the benchmarks in the industry. What's your view on that? Do you think it's worth doing at the moment?
Oh, absolutely. This is where we talked about it before. I think it was episode 1 or episode 2. We talked about you learn good habits in bad times and bad habits in good times. So the risk is that the guard gets dropped after a really strong May, June, that you drop into old ways and you might have a bit of a tougher July, August, that you don't get lulled into a false sense of security, making sure you're following up on all your leads. We talked about that with Ag, and also we talked about in episode 1, as response times to leads are critical, but definitely getting a third party in to assist you, if you are able to go through line by line to see where are the opportunities, where can you maximise and really get those good habits sorted in these interesting and challenging times.
And Mark, Zoom's become a big thing now for meetings online and not actually physically going out and seeing people. You're getting coffees online. Do you think this is a tool dealers can use to set up call cycles to make sure they keep in contact with their big fleets, even their smaller fleets, and they're just touching base and seeing how they're doing, in terms of their vehicle replacement, what's happening in the market, and what are the challenges those fleet customers are facing? Do you think this is a good tool to use for dealers and to keep their sales consultants talking to customers?
B2B is an interesting space. We talked about that in episode 2. It's a long-term burn and it's a critical relationship exercise. So part of that relationship is engaging, whether it be phone, emails, texts, and Zoom. Where possible, Zoom out of all of them is the best. However, Zoom still requires some technology and some time to be locked in for both parties for it to work. I think it's a great tool. We're using it right now. However, don't underestimate a text and the power of a text, just to keep that communication as a starting point, and then elevate to Zoom, but set up the framework and the agenda before you get to the Zoom call. And this is where that's a critical piece. But those that are able to do the coffees, I'd rather, if you're in that space, get face-to-face. Because if everyone's doing Zoom and you're doing the face-to-face, you will stand out.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think the backing mentioned the tool part of it, and I think it's having your CRM and making sure that you have contacted all your customers, as you say, whether it's text, email, or phone call. You need to make sure that those are being followed through and you are having a regular contact with them. So I think you make a very good point there.
So, John, what would be your game plan for Q3 this year?
I think, Mark, to me, I think you have to go through every aspect of the business. You need to make sure that things are back on track, that your staff are motivated, that the guys are pumped, because if you leave them to feel that things are just, you're on a holding pattern, it's not going to work. So you need to start measuring them, holding them accountable, making sure that they're kicking their goals and that. It might be at a lower level, but you need to start bringing that in. You need to be a leader in the business. You need to be standing out and leading from the front, showing, be positive about everything. If your staff are coming into the dealership and you're talking about how tough things are and it's a difficult situation, that's going to follow, that negativity will follow through to staff. So I think you have to build the momentum for the business, and you have to work out then, look for those opportunities, as you say, in the digital side, what's happening there, on your contacting of the customers, and then driving all those opportunities. It's not going to be easy, but I think, as you said, the good dealers, they know what to do and they'll be doing that. And you need to make sure that you're in that top echelon of dealers, making sure that the right things are happening. Mark, that's why I think it's really important to have your plan, and you need to work that plan really hard and keep reviewing the plan continually to say, are we on track? Are things changing? What's changing? What is the impact? Then adjust your plan accordingly, just to make sure that you manage through this whole process. You have to be down to daily planning, rather than previously where you maybe sat and worked your plan once a month on what your orders were from the factory, and that you have to keep reviewing and making sure you're on top of exactly what's happening in the market. And then on the service side, it's really important to drive that very hard too, because that's our opportunity to stand out and offer a really good service to your customers, that they'll remember you once at the end of COVID.
And where do you see the OEMs going after this? Or as an OEM, what would be the game plan for the second half of 2020?
I think the biggest challenge for OEM right now is getting the balance of stock, because you don't want to order too much stock and you don't want to order too little stock. And then once you've decided how much stock you need, it's how do you make sure you can get your fair share of the units that are going to create volume and profitability for you. So it's how do you speak to the guys in the factory and make sure that, because as you know, being in a market such as Australia, we're a small market, we're a long way away. Their priority is, especially if you're a European brand or American brand, the priority is for cash flow. So they'll fill their supply chains that they know they can sell the car in 2-3 weeks and get the cash back in the bank. If they put it on a boat, it's 3-4 months before it gets to Australia. So I think those are going to be big challenges. Monitoring, so your distribution department is going to be really key in this, and their relationships with the factory, and how can they make sure that they get the right stock and the production is not delayed for your markets and that. So it's going to be working those relationships, making sure that they're supplying the right stock. And then once you get the stock on the boat, how do you try and pre-sell that, so as it comes in, that it's getting sold? So how do you market that stock before it even arrives, so that you maximize margin and you get it all pre-booked out to dealers, and dealers have on-sold that to their customers. So it's a difficult time, but I think there are opportunities to do that. So.
And this is where complexity is the enemy. The more model variation and options that you have and choice, the harder it is to predict and order to what those demands would be. And if you have to then build to order, those lead times are very long and often get pushed back with the factory making low volume right-hand drive versus their domestic left-hand drive market, where there's large quantities and shorter lead times. You then get to a challenge of how do you manage those customer expectations.
Yeah, Mark, I think to me, I'd cut down the color variants that you're marketing short term. This will be a temporary, I'll be cutting down the models, the colors, specifications, and keeping those very focused on your volume variants, and just bringing through the volume variants and not worrying about some of those smaller niche markets that short term they're very challenging to manage and predict. But if you can, because as you know, 80% of your volume comes from 20% of your models and variants. So I'll be focusing on those 20%, because that gives you 80% of the volume, making sure you get that 100% right. And then if you get orders for some of the smaller models or specifics, then you can order those, but there will be some sort of lead and wait time for those particular variants.
So for the big mainstream boys, a lot easier. I know it sounds ironic, but it's a lot easier to do the large volume and less variants. For the niche players, where there is that complexity, because that's how you carve out your niche, can you see that being more of a challenge for those guys?
Yeah, definitely. Really difficult for the OEMs that are selling 2,000 cars or 5,000 cars, because the way you grow your market share when you're a small brand is to fill all those niche markets where the big players, they find it difficult to manage all that. So that's where you carve your market share. And in times like this becomes really difficult. It's going to be a lot more difficult for how they manage this process now. And that's the risk, because some of those may not survive, or their parent companies might say, oh, this is too difficult to have representation in this very competitive market where we're only selling 2,000 cars. Let's maybe stop selling there short term until the markets start to pick up. So that's a risk. So we don't know what's going to happen there.
Now we hear, obviously, supply chain security has come up as a big factor with COVID-19. Now, with the auto business, because we've had a lot of stock here, because of ambitious targets, etc., there's been a lot of inventory on the ground. It's interesting, and we're keen to actually have a podcast with one of the supply chain PDIs to get their perspective as to what happens there, because I can see some changes afoot there. Now, John, we mentioned in one of the interviews that we had with John and Johan from South Africa about the agency model that's changing over there, and it's also coming in here. How do you see that impacting, given that second half of this year, moving to agency and more franchise brands exploring this agency idea? With supply chain security, would that not require them to actually have more inventory in compounds here versus the current model?
I think it all comes back to, Mark, how do you drive the targeting and forecasting as accurate as possible? When the market's good, you can go for higher market share and target higher and forecast higher. When the market's tight, you have to get as realistic target as possible and then forecast as accurately to that target. And it doesn't matter what model you have, because you have the same implications. And even in an agency model, dealers are still held accountable because they need to hit certain targets in that, because they will then get certain incentives to hit those targets, even though they don't own the stock. So it's still, in both situations, I think the targeting and forecasting is key.
And this is where it's interesting, we just went with your commentary around that. And you raise a very good point. You've got volume brands and you've got niche brands. Agency, would it be fair to say, works for volume, but would it be very difficult then to do agency for a niche brand?
No, I think there's probably quite a big opportunity to do agency for a niche brand, because it allows you to, if your situation of saying, well, you might carry more stock to make it more available and easier to represent your stock out there. Because if you have an agency model, you might say, okay, to grow market share, we're happy to run at 65 days stock or 70 days stock to show more models out at dealerships and have the stock there. That is, if a customer comes in, the dealer can sell the stock very easily. Whereas you should be running your inventory at around 50 days stock. And at that level, you then targeting specific models or driving the business in particular areas. So I think by having an agency model, it might help a smaller brand, especially if you're prepared to absorb that cost of holding the extra inventory and making it easier for the dealers to sell. And that can be a way to drive and obtain market share to grow into a market. But that depends on the parent company, how financially strong they are, how keen they are to grow their market share, in the local business, or what their target is to achieve there. If they're struggling financially at the parent company level and they've got big cost-cutting initiatives in place, they're definitely not going to be prepared to carry extra stock in the local market. And then it becomes quite challenging for a small brand to go agency route. That's just my personal opinion. Because it's all about efficiency. It's highly, and your big cost is holding stock. So what you have to weigh up, and whether it's an agency or a distributor model, is what is the most efficient way to turn that stock, and how do you keep those efficiency levels right? That's the challenge.
Interesting times. When we spoke with John and Johan from South Africa, they were very positive re how agency was received and executed in South Africa. So no surprises that we've got some key brands introducing it here.
You mentioned some of the dealers doing very large numbers. From your feedback, were those profitable deals, or were they aggressive deals in the market to achieve volume?
It's interesting. What I'm hearing, whether it be new cars, used cars, margins are good. As we had with Agostino, with his feedback, and also with Brendan Green from Pickles, Ag from Car Sales, there isn't a lot of discounting out there. There are no distressed marketing deals out there. And it comes down to, well, if you need one, here's the price. And that's where the risk is. It's been such a good month. And this is where, going back to what Carl was saying, don't waste a crisis. This crisis has brought a lot of good business, as it always does. As we had in the GFC, post-GFC, network profitability was through the roof. And this is a very good month, as was last month. June and May are very good months. And there'll be some carryover into July for some further deliveries from orders placed this month, rolling into July. So we're seeing it's a funny one. I'm still trying to work out. I've got my thoughts as to how it's going to play out. It's right now. It was really clear as to what we called would happen now has happened, and what we've called from a used car has happened. Supply and inventory. There are no arrivals in July. The PDIs, and we'll get one of the PDIs in for a podcast, and if we can do it later this week, it'd be fantastic. But the PDIs just don't have stock. So the compounds are at their lowest levels of inventory. Now, that's a risk. If we think about supply chain security, we can't yet. All you need is these factories to ramp up. They supply their local markets. They don't supply us as much. We then run out of cars. Great for profitability and retention of values for existing cars, but not good if you need volume throughputs. So it's a very interesting time. I think it's going to shake a few people out, and a lot of hard questions will be asked as to, well, okay, we made good money in June, and a lot of OEMs did some fantastic wholesaling in June. So to clear out that stock. So a lot of OEMs are going, hey, this is really good. How many of them will jump on board and go, well, let's just ramp right up because we're going to catch up. We've got to make up for our lost profits for the first half of this year. Let's go gangbusters for H2 and get inventory. And then do we get to the situation come September, October that we have this massive oversupply of stock coming into the country? And is that going to then bite us right at the time that maybe the consumer confidence starts waning if JobKeeper comes off and more people join the unemployment ranks?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Mark, because what I was fascinated when you said to me that one of the PDRs, the OEM had to actually go down and take photographs of the stockyard to show that there was no stock, because the parent company wouldn't believe them that they're running out of stock. So to me, that was a pretty fascinating story.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where we all know, we've been in this business for a few years now, John. We know the pendulum never swings back to the middle. It always goes one way or the other. And right now we saw the pendulum swing to recession and doom and gloom. May, June, it swung back, but it's come back over here hot, hot, hot. Is it going to swing back to doom and gloom, or is it going to hang over this way for a little bit longer? So we'll see what happens. I think it's going to come back a bit, and potentially may swing briefly over to the far left, and then we'll see what pans out towards the back end. But it all comes down to really government activity on what restrictions are in place and what incentives are in place. The restrictions caused the problem. The incentives gave us a very good May, June, and those incentives have been there all year. It's just right now, if you've made money, and a lot of these small businesses have made money up until March, they need to spend it and get that money back straight away. But if you haven't made money for the financial year, do you rush out and spend something early, or do you wait? And it's a wait and see approach.
Hi everybody, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, subscribe to us on our YouTube channel so we can notify you of future podcasts. You can like us on LinkedIn. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover, please leave notes for us either on LinkedIn or on our YouTube channel so we can cover those.
If you want any further information on any of the topics that we've covered in today's podcast or any of our previous podcasts, you can contact us, either John Sinclair or myself, Mark Palavestra, on LinkedIn, and we will be more than happy to enter further information with you and share this detail with you. But thank you once again for listening, and good luck.
And keep safe.